Chapter 30. The sullen, philosophic Lester was not so determined upon his future course of action as he appeared to be. Stern as was his mood, he did not see, after all, exactly what grounds he had for complaint. And yet the child's existence complicated matters considerably. He did not like to see the evidence of Jennie's previous misdeeds walking about in the shape of a human being. But as a matter of fact, he admitted to himself that long ago he might have forced Jennie's story out of her if he had gone about it in earnest. She would not have lied. He knew that. At the very outset, he might have demanded the history of her past. He had not done so. Well, now it was too late. The one thing it did fix in his mind was that it would be useless to ever think of marrying her. It couldn't be done. Not by a man in his position. The best solution of the problem was to make reasonable provision for Jennie and then leave her. He went to his hotel with his mind made up, but he did not actually say to himself that he would do it at once. It is an easy thing for a man to theorize in a situation of this kind, quite another to act. Our comforts, appetites, and passions grow with usage, and Jennie was not only a comfort, but an appetite with him. Almost 4 years of constant association had taught him so much about her and himself that he was not prepared to let go easily or quickly. It was too much of a wrench. He could think of it bustling about the work of a great organization during the daytime, but when night came, it was a different matter. He could be lonely, too. He discovered, much to his surprise, and it disturbed him. One of the things that interested him in this situation was Jennie's early theory that the intermingling of Vesta with him and her in this new relationship would injure the child. Just how did she come by that feeling, he wanted to know. His place in the world was better than hers. Yet it dawned on him after a time that there might have been something in her point of view. She did not know who he was or what he would do with her. He might leave her shortly. Being uncertain, she wished to protect her baby. That wasn't so bad. Then again, he was curious to know what the child was like. The daughter of a man like Senator Brander might be somewhat of an infant. He was a brilliant man, and Jennie was a charming woman. He thought of this, and while it irritated him, it aroused his curiosity. He ought to go back and see the child. He was really entitled to a view of it, but he hesitated because of his own attitude in the beginning. It seemed to him that he really ought to quit, and here he was parleying with himself. The truth was that he couldn't. These years of living with Jennie had made him curiously dependent upon her. Who had ever been so close to him before? His mother loved him, but her attitude toward him had not so much to do with real love as with ambition. His father was a man like himself. All of his sisters were distinctly wrapped up in their own affairs. Robert and he were temperamentally uncongenial. With Jennie, he had really been happy. He had truly lived. She was necessary to him. The longer he stayed away from her, the more he wanted her. He finally decided to have a straight-out talk with her, to arrive at some sort of understanding. She ought to get the child and take care of it. She must understand that he might eventually want to quit. She ought to be made to feel that a definite change had taken place, though no immediate break might occur. That same evening, he went out to the apartment. Jennie heard him enter, and her heart began to flutter. And she took her courage in both hands and went to meet him. "There's just one thing to be done about this as far as I can see," began Lester with characteristic directness. "Get the child and bring her here where you can take care of her. There's no use leaving her in the hands of strangers." "I will, Lester," said Jennie submissively. "I always wanted to." "Very well, then. You better do it at once." He took an evening newspaper out of his pocket and strolled toward one of the front windows. Then he turned to her. "You and I might as well understand each other, Jenny," he went on. "I can see how this thing came about. It was a piece of foolishness on my part not to have asked you before and made you tell me. It was silly for you to conceal it, even if you didn't want the child's life mixed with mine. You might have known that it couldn't be done. That's neither here nor there, though, now. The thing that I want to point out is that one can't live and hold a relationship such as ours without confidence. You and I had that, I thought. I don't see my way clear to ever hold more than a tentative relationship with you on this basis. The thing is too tangled. There's too much cause for scandal." "I know," said Jenny. "Now, I don't propose to do anything hasty. For my part, I don't see why things can't go on about as they are, certainly for the present, but I want you to look at the facts in the face." Jenny sighed. "I know, Lester," she said. "I know." He went to the window and stared out. There were some trees in the yard where the darkness was settling. He wondered how this would really come out, for he acted like a home atmosphere. Should he leave the apartment and go to his club? "You'd better get the dinner," he suggested, after a time, turning toward her irritably. But he did not feel so distant as he looked. It was a shame that life could not be more decently organized. He strolled back to his lounge, and Jenny went about her duties. She was thinking of Vesta, of her ungrateful attitude toward Lester, of his final decision never to marry her. So that was how one dream had been wrecked by folly. She spread the table, lighted the pretty silver candles, made his favorite biscuit, put a small leg of lamb in the oven to roast, and washed some lettuce leaves for a salad. She had been a diligent student of a cookbook for some time, and she had learned a good deal from her mother. All the time she was wondering how the situation would work out. He would leave her eventually, no doubt of that. He would go away and marry someone else. "Oh well," she thought finally. "He's not going to leave me right away. That is something. And I can bring Vesta here." She sighed as she carried the things to the table. If life would only give her Lester and Vesta together. But that hope was over. Chapter 31. There was peace and quiet for some time after this storm. Jenny went the next day and brought Vesta away with her. The joy of the reunion between mother and child made up for many other worries. Now I can do by her as I ought, she thought. And 3 or 4 times during the day she found herself humming a little song. Lester came only occasionally at first. He was trying to make himself believe that he ought to do something toward reforming his life, toward bringing about that eventual separation which he had suggested. He did not like the idea of a child being in this apartment, particularly that particular child. He fought his way through a period of calculated neglect, and then began to return to the apartment more regularly. In spite of all its drawbacks, it was a place of quiet, peace, and very notable personal comfort. During the first days of Lester's return, it was difficult for Jenny to adjust matters so as to keep the playful, nervous, almost uncontrollable child from annoying the staid, emphatic, commercial-minded man. Jenny gave Vesta a severe talking to the first night Lester telephoned that he was coming, telling her that he was a very bad-tempered man who didn't like children and that she mustn't go near him. "You mustn't talk," she said. "You mustn't ask questions. Let Mama ask you what you want and don't reach ever." Vesta agreed solemnly, but her childish mind hardly grasped the full significance of the warning. Lester came at 7. Jenny, who had taken great pains to array Vesta as attractively as possible, had gone into her bedroom to give her own toilet a last touch. Vesta was supposedly in the kitchen. As a matter of fact, she had followed her mother to the door of the sitting room, where now she could be plainly seen. Lester hung up his hat and coat. Then, turning, he caught his first glimpse. The child looked very sweet. He admitted that at a glance. She was arrayed in a blue-dotted white flannel dress with a soft roll collar and cuffs, and the costume was completed by white stockings and shoes. Her corn-colored ringlets hung gaily about her face. Blue eyes, rosy lips, rosy cheeks completed the picture. Lester stared, almost inclined to say something, but restrained himself. Vesta shyly retreated. When Jenny came out, he commented on the fact that Vesta had arrived. "Rather sweet-looking child," he said. "Do you have much trouble in making her mind?" "Not much," she returned. Jenny went on to the dining room, and Lester overheard a scrap of their conversation. "Who are he?" asked Vesta. "Shh! That's your Uncle Lester. Didn't I tell you you mustn't talk?" "Are he your uncle?" "No, dear, don't talk now. Run into the kitchen." "Are he only my uncle?" "Yes, now run along." "All right." In spite of himself, Lester had to smile. What might have followed if the child had been homely, misshapen, peevish, or all three, can scarcely be conjectured. Had Jenny been less tactful, even in the beginning he might have obtained a disagreeable impression. As it was, the natural beauty of the child, combined with the mother's gentle diplomacy in keeping her in the background, served to give him that fleeting glimpse of innocence and youth which is always pleasant. The thought struck him that Jenny had been the mother of a child all these years. She had been separated from it for months at a time. She had never even hinted at its existence, and yet her affection for Vesta was obviously great. "It's queer," he said. "She's a peculiar woman." One morning, Lester was sitting in the parlor reading his paper when he thought he had heard something stir. He turned, and was surprised to see a large blue eye fixed upon him through the crack of a neighboring door. The effect was most disconcerting. It was not like the ordinary eye, which under such embarrassing circumstances would have been immediately withdrawn. It kept its position with deliberate boldness. He turned his paper solemnly and looked again. There was the eye. He turned it again. Still was the eye present. He crossed his legs and looked again. Now the eye was gone. This little episode, unimportant in itself, was yet informed with the saving grace of comedy, a thing to which Lester was especially responsive. Although not in the least inclined to relax his attitude of aloofness, he found his mind in the minutest degree tickled by the mysterious appearance. The corners of his mouth were animated by a desire to turn up. He did not give way to the feeling and stuck by his paper, but the incident remained very clearly in his mind. The young wayfarer had made her first really important impression upon him. Not long after this, Lester was sitting one morning at breakfast, calmly eating his chop and conning his newspaper, when he was aroused by another visitation, this time not quite so simple. Jenny had given Vesta her breakfast, and set her to amuse herself alone until Lester should leave the house. Jenny was seated at the table pouring out the coffee when Vesta suddenly appeared, very businesslike in manner, and marched through the room. Lester looked up, and Jenny colored and arose. "What is it, Vesta?" she inquired, following her. By this time, however, Vesta had reached the kitchen, secured a little broom, and returned, a droll determination lighting her face. "I want my little broom," she exclaimed, and marched sedately past, at which manifestation of spirit Lester again twitched internally. this time allowing the slightest suggestion of a smile to play across his mouth. The final effect of this intercourse was gradually to break down the feeling of distaste Lester had for the child, and to establish in its place a sort of tolerant recognition of her possibilities as a human being. The developments of the next 6 months were of a kind to further relax the strain of opposition which still existed in Lester's mind. Although not at all resigned to the somewhat tainted atmosphere in which he was living, he yet found himself so comfortable that he could not persuade himself to give it up. It was too much like a bed of down. Jennie was too worshipful. The condition of unquestioned liberty, so far as all his old social relationships were concerned, coupled with the privilege of quiet, simplicity, and affection in the home, was too inviting. He lingered on, and began to feel that perhaps it would be just as well to let matters rest as they were. During this period, his friendly relations with the little Vesta insensibly strengthened. He discovered that there was a real flavor of humor about Vesta's doings, and so came to watch for its development. She was forever doing something interesting, and although Jennie watched over her with a care that was in itself a revelation to him, nevertheless Vesta managed to elude every effort to suppress her, and came straight home with her remarks. Once, for example, she was sawing away at a small piece of meat upon her large plate with her big knife, when Lester remarked to Jennie that it might be advisable to get her a little breakfast set. "She can hardly handle these knives." "Yes," said Vesta instantly, "I need a little knife. My hand is just so very little." She held it up. Jennie, who never could tell what was to follow, reached over and put it down, while Lester with difficulty restrained a desire to laugh. Another morning, not long after, she was watching Jennie put the lumps of sugar in Lester's cup when she broke in with, "I want 2 lumps in mine, Mamma." "No, dearest," replied Jennie, "you don't need any in yours. You have milk to drink." "Uncle Lester has 2, she protested. "Yes," returned Jennie, "but you're only a little girl. Perhaps you mustn't say anything like that at the table. It isn't nice." "Uncle Lester eats too much sugar," was her immediate rejoinder, at which that fine gourmet smiled broadly. "I don't know about that," he put in, for the first time deigning to answer her directly. "That sounds like the fox and grapes to me." Vesta smiled back at him, and now that the ice was broken, she chattered on unrestrainedly. One thing led to another, and at last Lester felt as though, in a way, the little girl belonged to him. He was willing even that she should share in such opportunities as his position and wealth might make possible, provided, of course, that he stayed with Jennie, and they worked out some arrangement which would not put him hopelessly out of touch with the world which was back of him, and which he had to keep constantly in mind. Chapter 32. The following spring the showrooms and warehouse were completed, and Lester removed his office to the new building. Heretofore he had been transacting all his business affairs at the Grand Pacific and the club. From now on he felt himself to be firmly established in Chicago, as if that was to be his future home. A large number of details were thrown upon him, the control of a considerable office force, and the handling of various important transactions. It took away from him the need of traveling, that duty going to Amy's husband, under the direction of Robert. The latter was doing his best to push his personal interests, not only through the influence he was bringing to bear upon his sisters, but through his reorganization of the factory. Several men whom Lester was personally fond of were in danger of elimination. But Lester did not hear of this, and Kane Sr. was inclined to give Robert a free hand. Age was telling on him. He was glad to see someone with a strong policy come up and take charge. Lester did not seem to mind. Apparently he and Robert were on better terms than ever before. Matters might have gone on smoothly enough were it not for the fact that Lester's private life with Jennie was not a matter which could be permanently kept under cover. At times he was seen driving with her by people who knew him in a social and commercial way. He was for brazening it out on the ground that he was a single man, and at liberty to associate with anybody he pleased. Jennie might be any young woman of good family in whom he was interested. He did not propose to introduce her to anybody if he could help it, and he always made it a point to be a fast traveler in driving in order that others might not attempt to detain and talk to him. At the theater, as has been said, she was simply Miss Gerhardt. The trouble was that many of his friends were also keen observers of life. They had no quarrel to pick with Lester's conduct, only he had been seen in other cities in times past with this same woman. She must be someone whom he was maintaining irregularly. Well, what of it? Wealth and youthful spirits must have their fling. Rumors came to Robert, who, however, kept his own counsel. If Lester wanted to do this sort of thing, well and good, but there must come a time when there would be a showdown. This came about in one form about a year and a half after Lester and Jennie had been living in the North Side apartment. It so happened that during a stretch of inclement weather in the fall, Lester was seized with a mild form of grippe. When he felt the first symptoms, he thought of his indisposition would be a matter of short duration, and tried to overcome it by taking a hot bath and a liberal dose of quinine. But the infection was stronger than he counted on. By morning, he was flat on his back with a severe fever and a splitting headache. His long period of association with Jennie had made him incautious. Policy would have dictated that he should betake himself to his hotel and endure his sickness alone. As a matter of fact, he was very glad to be in the house with her. He had to call up the office to say that he was indisposed and would not be down for a day or so. Then he yielded himself comfortably to her patient ministrations. Jennie, of course, was delighted to have Lester with her, sick or well. She persuaded him to see a doctor and have him prescribe. She brought him potions of hot lemonade, and bathed his face and hands in cold water over and over. Later, when he was recovering, she made him appetizing cups of beef tea or gruel. It was during this illness that the first real contremps occurred. Lester's sister Louise, who had been visiting friends in St. Paul and who had written him that she might stop off to see him on her way, decided upon an earlier return than she had originally planned. While Lester was sick at his apartment, she arrived in Chicago. Calling up the office and finding that he was not there and would not be down for several days, she asked where he could be reached. "I think he is at his rooms in the Grand Pacific," said an incautious secretary. "He's not feeling well." Louise, a little disturbed, telephoned to the Grand Pacific and was told that Mr. Kane had not been there for several days. Did not, as a matter of fact, occupy his rooms more than 1 or 2 days a week. Piqued by this, she telephoned his club. It so happened that at the club there was a telephone boy who had called up the apartment a number of times for Lester himself. He had not been cautioned not to give its number. As a matter of fact, it had never been asked for by anyone else. When Louise stated that she was Lester's sister and was anxious to find him, the boy replied, "I think he still lives at 19 Schiller Place." "Whose address is that you're giving?" inquired a passing clerk. "Mr. Kane's." "Well, don't be giving out addresses. Don't you know that yet?" The boy apologized, but Louise had hung up the receiver and was gone. About an hour later, curious as to this third residence of her brother, Louise arrived at Schiller Place. Ascending the steps, it was a 2-apartment house. She saw the name of Kane on the door leading to the second floor. Ringing the bell, she was opened to by Jennie, who was surprised to see so fashionably attired a young woman. "This is Mr. Kane's apartment, I believe," began Louise condescendingly, as she looked in at the open door behind Jennie. She was a little surprised to meet a young woman, but her suspicions were as yet only vaguely aroused. "Yes," replied Jennie. He's sick, I believe. I'm his sister. May I come in? Jenny, had she had time to collect her thoughts, would have tried to make some excuse. But Louise, with the audacity of her birth and station, swept past before Jenny could say a word. Once inside, Louise looked about her inquiringly. She found herself in the sitting room which gave into the bedroom where Lester was lying. Vesta happened to be playing in one corner of the room and stood up to eye the newcomer. The open bedroom showed Lester quite plainly lying in bed, a window to the left of him, his eyes closed. "Oh, there you are, old fellow!" exclaimed Louise. "What's ailing you?" She hurried on. Lester, who at the sound of her voice had opened his eyes, realized in an instant how things were. He pulled himself up on one elbow, but words failed him. "Why, hello, Louise," he finally forced himself to say. "Where did you come from?" "St. Paul. I came back sooner than I thought," she answered lamely, a sense of something wrong irritating her. "I had a hard time finding you, too. Who's your, She was about to say pretty housekeeper, but turned to find Jenny dazedly gathering up certain articles in the adjoining room and looking dreadfully distraught. Lester cleared his throat hopelessly. His sister swept the place with an observing eye. It took in the home atmosphere, which was both pleasing and suggestive. There was a dress of Jenny's lying across a chair in a familiar way which caused Miss Kane to draw herself up wearily. She looked at her brother, who had a rather curious expression in his eyes. He seemed slightly nonplussed, but cool and defiant. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come out here," said Lester finally, before Louise could give vent to the rising question in her mind. "Why shouldn't I?" she exclaimed, angered at the brazen confession. "You're my brother, aren't you? Why should you have any place that I couldn't come?" "Well, I like that. And from you to me." "Listen, Louise," went on Lester, drawing himself up further on one elbow. "You know as much about life as I do. There's no need of our getting into an argument. I didn't know you were coming, or I would have made other arrangements." "Other arrangements, indeed," she sneered. "I should think as much. The idea!" She was greatly irritated to think that she had fallen into this trap. It was really disgraceful of Lester. "I wouldn't be so haughty about it," he declared, his color rising. "I'm not apologizing to you for my conduct. I'm saying I would have made other arrangements, which is a very different thing from begging your pardon. If you don't want to be civil, you needn't." "Why, Lester Kane!" she exclaimed, her cheeks flaming. "I thought better of you. Honestly, I did. I should think you would be ashamed of yourself living here in the open." She paused without using the word. "And our friends scattered all over the city. It's terrible. I thought you had more sense of decency and consideration." "Decency nothing," he flared. "I tell you, I'm not apologizing to you. If you don't like this, you know what you can do." "Oh," she exclaimed. "This from my own brother, and for the sake of that creature. Whose child is that?" she demanded, savagely and yet curiously. "Never mind. It's not mine. If it were, it wouldn't make any difference. I wish you wouldn't busy yourself about my affairs." Jenny, who had been moving about the dining room beyond the sitting room, heard the cutting references to herself. She winced with pain. "Don't flatter yourself. I won't anymore," retorted Louise. "I should think, though, that you, of all men, would be above anything like this. And that with a woman so obviously beneath you. Why, I thought she was." She was again going to add, "your housekeeper," but she was interrupted by Lester, who was angry to the point of brutality. "Never mind what you thought she was," he growled. "She's better than some who do the so-called superior thinking. I know what you think. It's neither here nor there, I tell you. I'm doing this, and I don't care what you think. I have to take the blame. Don't bother about me." "Well, I won't, I assure you," she flung back. It's quite plain that your family means nothing to you. But if you had any sense of decency, Lester Kane, you would never let your sister be trapped into coming into a place like this. I'm disgusted. That's all. And so will the others be when they hear of it. She turned on her heel and walked scornfully out, a withering look being reserved for Jenny, who had been unfortunately stepped near the door of the dining room. Vesta had disappeared. Jenny came in a little while later and closed the door. She knew of nothing to say. Lester, his thick hair pushed back from his vigorous face, leaned back moodily on his pillow. What a devilish trick of fortune, he thought. Now she would go home and tell it to the family. His father would know, and his mother. Robert, Imogene, Amy, all would hear. He would have no explanation to make. She had seen. She stared at the wall meditatively. He stared at the wall meditatively. Meanwhile, Jenny, moving about her duties, also found food for reflection. So this was her real position in another woman's eyes. Now she could see what the world thought. This family was as aloof from her as it lived on another planet. To his sisters and brothers, his father and mother, she was a bad woman, a creature far beneath him socially, far beneath him mentally and morally, a creature of the streets. And she had hoped somehow to rehabilitate herself in the eyes of the world. It cut her as nothing before had ever done. The thought tore a great, gaping wound in her sensibilities. She was really low and vile in her, Louise's, eyes, in the world's eyes, basically so in Lester's eyes. How could it be otherwise? She went about numb and still, but the ache of defeat and disgrace was unreadable. Oh, if she could only see some way to make herself right with the world, to live honorably, to be decent. How could that possibly be brought about? It ought to be, she knew that, but how? Chapter 33. Outraged in her family pride, Louise lost no time in returning to Cincinnati, where she told the story of her discovery, embellished with many details. According to her, she was met at the door by a silly-looking white-faced woman who did not even offer to invite her in when she announced her name, but stood there, looking just as guilty as a person possibly could. Lester also had acted shamefully, having outbrazened the matter to her face. When she had demanded to know whose the child was, he had refused to tell her. "It isn't mine," was all he would say. "Oh dear, oh dear," exclaimed Mrs. Kane, who was the first to hear the story. "My son, my Lester, how could he have done it?" "And such a creature," exclaimed Louise emphatically, as though the words needed to be reiterated to give them any shadow of reality. "I went there solely because I thought I could help him," continued Louise. "I thought when they said he was indisposed that he might be seriously ill. How should I have known?" "Poor Lester," exclaimed her mother. "To think he would come to anything like that." Mrs. Kane turned the difficult problem over in her mind, and having no previous experiences whereby to measure it, telephoned for old Archibald, who came out from the factory and sat through the discussion with a solemn countenance. So Lester was living openly with a woman of whom they had never heard. He would probably be as defiant and indifferent as his nature was strong. The standpoint of parental authority was impossible. Lester was a centralized authority in himself, and if any overtures for a change of conduct were to be made, they would have to be very diplomatically executed. Archibald Kane returned to the manufactory sore and disgusted, but determined that something ought to be done. He held a consultation with Robert, who confessed that he had heard disturbing rumors from time to time, but had not wanted to say anything. Mrs. Kane suggested that Robert might go to Chicago and have a talk with Lester. "You ought to see that this thing, if continued, is going to do him irreparable damage," said Mr. Kane. "He cannot hope to carry it off successfully. Nobody can. He ought to marry her, or he ought to quit. I want you to tell him that for me." "All well and good," said Robert, "but who's going to convince him? I'm sure I don't want the job." "I hope to," said old Archibald. "Eventually, but you'd better go up and try anyhow. He can't do any harm. He might come to his senses." I don't believe it," replied Robert. "He's a strong man. You see how much good talk does him down here. Still, I'll go if it will relieve your feelings any. Mother wants it." "Yes, yes," said his father distractedly. "Better go." Accordingly, Robert went. Without allowing himself to anticipate any particular measure of success in this adventure, he rode pleasantly into Chicago, confident that in the reflection that he had all the powers of morality and justice on his side. Upon Robert's arrival the third morning after Louise's interview, he called up the Ware rooms, but Lester was not there. He then telephoned to the house and tactfully made an appointment. Lester was still indisposed, but he preferred to come down to the office, and he did. He met Robert in his cheerful, nonchalant way, and together they talked business for a time. Then followed a pregnant silence. "Well, I suppose you know what brought me up here," began Robert tentatively. "I think I could make a guess of it," Lester replied. "They were all very much worried over the fact that you were sick, Mother particularly. You're not in any danger of having a relapse, are you?" "I think not. Louise said there was some sort of a peculiar menage she ran into up there. You're not married, are you?" "No. The young woman Louise saw is just—" Robert waved his hand expressively. Lester nodded. "I don't want to be inquisitive, Lester. I didn't come up for that. I'm simply here because the family felt that I ought to come. Mother was so very much distressed that I couldn't do less than see you for her sake." He paused, and Lester, touched by the fairness and respect of his attitude, felt that mere courtesy at least made some explanation due. "I don't know that anything I can say will help matters much," he replied thoughtfully. "There's really nothing to be said. I have the woman, and the family has its objections. The chief difficulty about the thing seems to be the bad luck in being found out." He stopped, and Robert turned over the substance of this worldly reasoning in his mind. Lester was very calm about it. He seemed, as usual, to be most convincingly sane. "You're not contemplating marrying her, are you?" queried Robert hesitatingly. "I hadn't come to that," answered Lester coolly. They looked at each other quietly for a moment, and then Robert turned his glance to the distant scene of the city. "It's useless to ask whether you are seriously in love with her, I suppose," ventured Robert. "I don't know whether I'd be able to discuss that divine afflatus with you or not," returned Lester with a touch of grim humor. "I have never experienced the sensation myself. All I know is that the lady is very pleasing to me." "Well, it's all a question of your own well-being and the family's, Lester," went on Robert after another pause. "Morality doesn't seem to figure in it anyway. At least you and I can't discuss that together. Your feelings on that score naturally relate to you alone. But the matter of your own personal welfare seems to me to be substantial enough ground to base a plea on. The family's feelings and pride are also fairly important. Father's the kind of man who sets more store by the honor of his family than most men. You know that as well as I do, of course." I know how Father feels about it, returned Lester. The whole business is as clear to me as it is to any of you. Though offhand, I don't see just what's to be done about it. These matters aren't always of a day's growth, and they can't be settled in a day. The girl's here. To a certain extent, I'm responsible that she is here. Well, I'm not about to go willing into details. There's always more in these affairs than appears on the court calendar. Of course, I don't know what your relations with her have been, returned Robert, and I'm not curious to know. But it does look like a bit of injustice all around, don't you think? Unless you intend to marry her. This last was put forth as a feeler. I might be willing to agree to that too, was Lester's baffling reply, if anything were to be gained by it. The point is, the woman is here and the family is in possession of the fact. Now, if there is anything to be done, I have to do it. There isn't anybody else who can act for me in this matter. Lester lapsed into a silence, and Robert rose and paced the floor, coming back after a time to say, You say you haven't any idea of marrying her? Or rather, you haven't come to it? I wouldn't, Lester. It seems to me you would be making the mistake of your life from every point of view. I don't want to orate, but a man of your position has so much to lose. You can't afford to do it. Aside from family considerations, you have too much at stake. You'd be simply throwing your life away. He paused, with his right hand held out before him, as was customary when he was deeply in earnest. And Lester felt the candor and simplicity of this appeal. Robert was not criticizing him now. He was making an appeal to him, and this was somewhat different. The appeal passed without comment. However, and then Robert began on a new tack, this time picturing old Archibald's fondness for Lester, and the hope he had always entertained that he would marry some well-to-do Cincinnati girl, Catholic, if agreeable to him, but at least worthy of his station. And Mrs. Kane felt the same way. Surely Lester must realize that. I know just how all of them feel about it, Lester interrupted at last, but I don't see anything's to be done about it right now. You mean you don't think it would be policy for you to give her up just at present? I mean that she's been exceptionally good to me, and that I'm morally under obligations to do the best I can by her. What that may be, I can't tell. To live with her? Inquired Robert coolly. Certainly not to turn her out bag and baggage if she has been accustomed to live with me, replied Lester. Robert sat down again, as if he considered his recent appeal futile. Can't family reasons persuade you to make some amicable arrangements with her and let her go? Not without due consideration of the matter. No. You don't think you could hold out some hope that the thing will end quickly? Something that would give me a reasonable excuse for softening down the pain of it to the family? I would be perfectly willing to do anything which would take away the edge of this thing for the family, but the truth's the truth. And I can't see any room for equivocation between you and me. As I've said before, these relationships are involved with things which make it impossible to discuss them. Unfair to me, unfair to the woman. No one can see how they are to be handled except the people that are in them, and even they can't always see. I'd be a damned dog to stand up here and give you my word to do anything except the best that I can. Lester stopped, and now Robert rose and paced the floor again, only to come back after a time and say, You don't think there's anything to be done just at present? Not at present. Very well then. I expect I might as well be going. I don't know that there's anything else we can talk about. Won't you stay and take lunch with me? I think I might manage to get down to the hotel if you'll stay. No, thank you, answered Robert. I believe I can make that 1:00 train for Cincinnati. I'll try, anyhow. They stood before each other now, Lester, pale and rather flaccid, Robert clear, wax-like, well-knit and shrewd, and one could see the difference time had already made. Robert was the clean, decisive man. Lester, the man of doubts. Robert was the spirit of business energy and integrity embodied. Lester, the spirit of commercial self-sufficiency, looking at life with an uncertain eye. Together they made a striking picture, which was none the less powerful for the thoughts that were now running through their minds. "Well," said the older brother after a time, "I don't suppose there's anything more I can say. I had hoped to make you feel just as we do about this thing, but of course you are on your own best of judge of it. You are your own best judge of this. Yeah. If you don't see it now, nothing I could say would make you. It strikes me as a very bad move on your part, though." Lester listened. He said nothing, but his face expressed an unchanged purpose. Robert turned for his hat, and they walked to the office door together. "I'll put the best face I can on it," said Robert, and walked out.